Welcome to this two-part video from the Carleton University Library on evaluating sources using the Act Up test. In Part 1, we defined the elements of the Act Up test. And in Part 2, this video, we use the Act Up Test Rubric to evaluate a website as a source of information for academic projects. The Act Up test is designed to support anti-oppression work. Each of the 5 criteria, authority, currency, truthfulness, unbiased, and positionality and privilege, represent complex approaches to thinking about information and involve searching for details that may or may not be available. The Act Up Test Rubric is designed to simplify the application of this test and make it easier to identify bias in sources. To get to the Act Up Test Rubric, we will start on the library homepage at library.carleton.ca. Underneath the Research Support column, we will click on the Guides link. And here we will click on the link to Subject Guides. Using the alphabet at the top, we will click on E for Evaluating. And then at the bottom of the page, we will click on the hyperlink Evaluating Sources Use the Act Up Test. Here on the subject guide, we will scroll down until we come to the link for the Act Up blank rubric, and we will click on this hyperlink. The rubric guides us through the process of applying the Act Up test by allowing us to score a source for each of the 5 criteria. The rubric assigns points for each criterion and uses the final total score to decide if a source passes or fails the Act Up test. A source passes the Act Up test if it gets 10 to 15 out of 15 points. The source fails the Act Up test if it gets 0 to 9 out of 15 points. If a source passes the test, then we can consider it for our academic work. If the source fails the test, then we can decide not to use it for a class project or assignment. Let's use this rubric to evaluate a set of web pages as a source for a project on privilege in Canada during the COVID-19 pandemic. We will evaluate the Carleton University web pages for the COVID-19 coronavirus. Here is the completed rubric for these web pages. The instructions for using the rubric are on the first page. The second page begins with important information about the source, including the research topic, the types of sources allowed for the assignment, the website name and URL, and the date of the evaluation. The date of evaluation is critical. A second evaluation done at a later date may include new content. A well-maintained website may share new content regularly. The evaluative section of the rubric has 6 columns. The first column identifies each criterion and includes strategies for finding the information needed to assess the source. Having a clear pathway simplifies this search for information. The next 4 columns set out criteria for scoring a source. Note that these criteria and point scores are a framework for the evaluation, not a set of hard and fast rules. There may be times when it is necessary to make a judgment call on the overall importance of information that may be missing or cannot be found. The final column is a space to take notes, to track the research process, and the thinking about the source. Now let's look at the scores for each criterion. For authority, the first criterion, the Carleton University COVID-19 pages score 3 points. Most of the information required for this criterion is provided. We can identify author or group of authors. The organization, that is the publisher, is reputable. Contact information is provided. The URL has a recognized domain extension. The university has an updated About Us page. And there are no fake news reports or conflicts of interest identified. However, for the authors identified, the credentials are implied, and we will have to look elsewhere to confirm these credentials along with their other work. On the COVID-19 coronavirus pages, information is provided about the groups responsible for the institutional COVID-19 policies and procedures. When we click on the link to Planning Groups, and then the link to Scenario Planning, we find more information about the Carleton University Scenario Planning Working Group. This group includes senior university officers, as well as links to the group's reports and recommendations. The credentials of these individuals are implied. For example, many may have a PhD. However, we would have to search the university website to confirm this information. Back on the main COVID-19 coronavirus page, a contact email is found at the bottom. Finally, the URL extension for the university website .ca is safe. The pages score 3 points for the next criterion, currency. The date of publication, regular updates, and functional links can all be found. Back on the main COVID-19 coronavirus page, the copyright date for the university website is found at the bottom. It is 2021. Updates to the COVID-19 coronavirus pages are clearly identified by date and time. And finally, each of these hyperlinks is functional. The web pages score 2 for truthfulness. The lower score is the result of a lack of information about the editorial process used for either content added to the website or the research publication shared. However, the pages do seem to share accurate facts and/or supporting data and/or evidence, and links are provided. The information on these pages would not be peer-reviewed. The pages do not disseminate original scholarly research. As such, we cannot assess this source in terms of citation circles, that is, citations drawn from a limited group of authors and/or disciplines that could exclude certain perspectives and/or voices. And there is no stated editorial policy, which could be listed in the Policies and Protocols section. The university does have a Department of University Communications, and this group might provide some additional editorial assistance. However, this information cannot be verified on the web pages. Information from staff in the Department of University Communications confirms that Carleton University has a web content policy. This document sets out various procedures that individual departments must follow when creating and posting on web pages. These procedures cover a range of topics such as accessibility in browsers, copyright and the duplication of official content, advertising and fundraising, and linking. Individual departments are also responsible for complying with the policy and ensuring that information is accurate and up to date. Finally, if we click on Research Resources in the left-hand navigation, we see that this provides access to documents that set out the framework for doing research at Carleton. The web pages score 3 points on the unbiased criterion. There is a clear purpose to the pages, the institutional point of view is clearly stated, as is the intended audience. Plus, there is no advertising and we can cross-reference links. The site is clearly intended to inform Carleton faculty, staff, and students about the institutional policies and protocols related to the COVID-19 pandemic. More information on the purpose of the site and the institutional processes is stated more clearly in the linked document, Working Together to Keep Campus Safe. There seems to be no additional funding or financial support provided outside of the university operating funds, as there is no advertising on the pages for outside organizations. Finally, links are provided to cross-reference information. The language is relatively objective in tone and vocabulary, and the content is written in plain language. That is, there seems to be little jargon. And in terms of the biases of the evaluator, they are biased towards complying with institutional and state regulations required behaviors, for example, being double vaccinated. So the information on these pages aligns with their own values. They can understand that they do apply filters to their own searching. They are using institutional information, rather than searching for information elsewhere about the university's policies and protocols during the pandemic. On the final criterion, Positionality and Privilege, the web pages score 1. While the source has no barriers to access, the pages are open access, there is a lack of diversity in terms of perspectives and voices. The pages target Carleton University faculty, staff, and students. So there is some diversity of perspective. However, those who work on campus include employees of other companies, for example, food services workers, and it's unclear if this information is also intended for these workers or whether they have to access pandemic-related information elsewhere. The site is written in plain language and for those who have a good grasp of written English. No translations are offered, which could exclude some international students and workers for whom English is not their first language. All Carleton University websites must comply with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, AODA, but it's unclear if the links would be informative if the content is accessed by a screen reader. Sources of information seem to be official government sites, as well as institutional websites and documents. The content is open access, so freely accessible to anyone with access to the internet. And the evaluator is privileged because they have stable Wi-Fi and several computer devices and understand written English well. In addition, they have support from their department on campus and so can easily ask questions and verify information. Adding up the points, the website scores 12 out of 15 and thus passes the Act Up test. However, the pages clearly reflect the bias and privilege of Carleton University faculty, staff, and students, and, more specifically, those whose values align with current health and institutional protocols and who have a stable internet connection and devices through which they can access the web pages. To review, the Act Up test is a framework for evaluating the positionality, privilege, and biases embedded in information. The criteria are designed to ensure that as creators of information, we think critically about our own positionality, privilege, and biases, and how they influence the information we produce. And as consumers of information, that we think critically about the sources that we choose and cite in our projects, as well as those that we repost, retweet, or share with our friends, followers, and other users. By applying the criteria of authority, currency, truthfulness, unbiased, and positionality and privilege, we can ensure that bias and filters are more visible and therefore can be acknowledged and discussed. The Act Up rubric is a way of applying these criteria to sources we find and might want to use for our academic work. Using the Act Up test and acting up is critical to pushing back against that is challenging and changing dominant narratives, stereotypes that marginalize certain social groups, and oppressive hierarchies of knowledge production. That is, ways of knowing and being that privilege one or more social groups over others. This is why using the Act Up test is an anti-oppressive practice. This is the end of this video.